Kat King is an information architect interested in language, meaning, and the things that we make. And she currently works as a business intelligence analyst for the University of Michigan Library. And she joins us today from sunny California. And in her talk today, Kat is going to maybe answer this question: where is the information? Please give me a warm virtual welcome to Kat King.
Hello. So I am Kat King, and I am a business intelligence analyst at the University of Michigan. But in 3 weeks, I will be an assessment and user experience researcher at Princeton University's library. So if you're looking for me after this, Michigan might not be the place to look. And today I am joining from Fresno, California in the Central Valley, which is UCUT's land. So this morning is all about information architecture. And sometimes in an event like this, an information architect will give a whole talk about redesigning a website's navigation. And then they'll say with a straight face, information architecture is not about website navigation. So maybe it's not a surprise that information architecture has a reputation as being difficult to get. This talk is about what information architecture is, agnostic of any particular work deliverable. Where is the information that we're architecting? And what are we doing when we use IA methods or take an IA approach to something? I define information architecture as the practice of ensuring ontological alignment. Ontological, meaning related to ontologies or having to do with concepts and categories, their properties and their relationships. And alignment, meaning the arrangement into appropriate relative positions. So information architecture is the practice of ensuring that concepts and categories and their properties and relationships are arranged into appropriate relative positions. But to understand what it might mean to arrange a category or a concept into an appropriate relative position, you need to have a good model for understanding what information is, which is hard because information is a slippery and abstract concept that works on multiple layers and scales and which we are all embedded within. This is the real reason why information architecture is difficult to get. Information is found in the patterned relationships between differences that reduce uncertainty. Differences are inconsistencies in how things are. A difference could be difference could be between multiple things or different parts of the same thing or the same thing at different times or in different conditions. And a patterned relationship means there's some consistency in a relationship between two or more inconsistencies. And to reduce uncertainty means that if you took a set of all of the probabilities of all of the possibilities of how one difference could be, you could use another difference that has a patterned relationship to narrow that set so you can better predict how it is. This is pretty easy to understand with an example. Let's say you wanted to pick a raspberry. You want to pick a good raspberry. You know that sometimes raspberries are good because they're yummy and other times they're less yummy. And do you think that's because sometimes they taste more sweet? That's a difference, sweet and not sweet. And there's an uncertainty now. Which one of these will taste sweet? But you probably know about a patterned relationship in raspberries between their sweetness and another difference, how red they are. If you know about that patterned relationship and you can see how red the raspberries are, then you can reduce your uncertainty about the question, which one will be sweet? You can reduce your options using the red color. The difference in the redness of the berries is information about the sweetness. That description of information is pretty subjective though. An imaginary you wanted to do something, eat a yummy berry, and you had a feeling about the relationship between yummy and sweet, and your understanding of how raspberries worked led you to use the way the light seemed in your eyes as information to reduce your uncertainty. We could diagram your ontology or your understanding of how these things are related like this maybe. But there's an objective side to this information too. Unripe raspberries contain a chemical called cyanidin, which becomes a slightly different chemical when it bonds with glucose. Both of these chemicals are useful to plants for their ability to reflect photons that wiggle at particular wavelengths. That is, that they're pigments and they make color. Here's a chart that I pulled from an article in the Journal of Food showing the chroma values, or the intensity of color perceived by typical human vision, for the sugar-free pigment in the dark marks at the bottom and the glucose-bonded one in the light marks. The color of both of these pigments is sensitive to pH, and in the typical pH range of raspberries, marked here in red, the pigment bonded with glucose is much more vibrant. So as the fruit accumulates sugar, the chemical structures of the pigment changes in a way that makes a difference in the photons that bounce off the fruit, which creates an objective patterned relationship between color and sweetness. In this case, the information is actually causal. We can think about the information as being here, in the flow from that chemical difference to our eye and in our mind. The information scientist, Marcia Bates, labels these types of information 1 and information 2. Information 1 is the patterned relationships in energy and matter that are in the universe, like the properties of the two chemicals. And information 2 is any bit of this that's given meaning by a living being. This information 1 is objectively true. The structure of the chemicals and the pH context means that the presence of sugar converts the pigment into one with a darker color. But an animal using this information doesn't typically have access to this full pattern. When a bear or a bird, or even you go berry picking, you don't think about the chemical reactions of the pigments. Your animal understanding of this pattern between the color and the sugar is centered in your own ontology and activated by your own needs at that moment. And you probably just pick the darker ones without thinking much about it. Even though the chemical reality that makes this patterned relationship between color and sugar is objectively true information 1, it's not really the case that it just is in the universe. It's a part of a larger pattern of making fruit, which from the plant's perspective is about embracing having your seeds eaten, but making sure it doesn't happen before they're ready. And this alignment between the raspberry plant and its goals, and your goal when you pick a berry, is a consequence of evolution creating this stability here. Not just the evolution of raspberries and humans, but a large-scale evolution of plants and animals and how they interact. The result is that the surface of the berry acts as an interface between these two systems, because the two ontologies align here and information can pass between them, which enables successful interactions, which reinforces the alignment. This local structural truth that creates alignment and stability between two systems is a little bit like what information architecture is. But information architecture happens at a different scale with a different type of information. I said at the start of this talk that information works at multiple layers and scales and that we're embedded within it. Here's what that means. What Marcia Bates calls information 1 is all the patterns of organization in matter and energy. This is the stuff of physics, the stuff that is in the universe, instead of the stuff that isn't. Every photon, every atom, all the forces like magnetism and heat, that's all information. And all kinds of information are made out of this. Some of this information 1 is different though, because some of it is life. Life are little systems of matter and energy that maintain an internal equilibrium, and that requires processing information. Things that are life don't interact with all of the information 1 there is. We evolve perceptions to sense specific types of differences that help us be the kind of life we are. For instance, some of us can detect photons. But processing information is work, so we've evolved to do this efficiently, prioritizing with attention and simplifying with aggregation to internalize relevant information that reduces uncertainty about things that matter to us. Life doesn't need to get it exactly objectively accurate all the time. We just need to improve our odds of continuing our pattern of equilibrium. And this good enough approach to using information is still how human brains work. Life efficiently processing relevant information gives rise to information 2. These are the patterns and differences that are meaningful to some living being, like how the red color of the berry is a sign that there's sugar there. Information 2 doesn't have to be a sign made by some system of life though. It doesn't even need to be causal. We might use thunder as information that it's going to rain. Thunder is an information one pattern, and while it often co-occurs with rain, so it may reduce my uncertainty about what's going to happen later, rain and thunder don't cause each other. In humans, these efficiencies give rise to what we call semantic information. That's information related to things that have meaning for people, which we manage using our semantic efficiencies. These include aggregating patterns into concepts like raspberries or red, which let us abstract and generalize patterns so we can manipulate and interrogate them in more efficient ways. In this talk, I haven't been talking about a specific raspberry or a specific raspberry bush. I've been talking about the concept of raspberries, and I haven't actually been doing that with much accuracy. Raspberries don't turn red when they get ripe. They turn more whatever color they are, and raspberries come in yellow, pink, red, and a deep purpley black. But the red ones are most commonly cultivated for human consumption, and the way concepts work means it's likely that most of you didn't notice, and only the most pedantic amongst you had an objection. We also have categories that let us organize concepts into meta concepts so we can more efficiently understand how they're related or infer things. Like raspberries are a plant, so they should have the same sort of properties that plants do, and they have fruit. And we have models for understanding how things work and how they interact with each other and how they change over time. Fruits need to ripen, therefore raspberries need to ripen. And this is where the information of information architecture is. It's in the concepts, categories, and mental models that we hold as individuals and as groups. Humans are cooperative social animals. We have complex languages that allow us to co-create and share concepts and categories and models by encoding them into specific patterns of information one, like sounds or movements or marks. And like how the natural interactions between berries and animals become a sort of negotiation that allows for the emergence of the structural condition, red equals sweet, which creates an alignment that's reinforced by its use, humans communicating with each other and working together and settling disputes and just generally living human lives allows for the emergence of new semantic information structures that can seem like they just objectively are, because we use them effortlessly, just like picking red berries. But like the berry color, they're alignments that self-reinforce through their use. And we can use them to talk to each other. So I can ask someone else to get raspberries for me, and I can tell them how to select the good ones. And this doesn't seem like a miraculous interaction to us. But here's the information. It's in the words. It's semantic information using concepts like good and red and raspberries, which encode information about the information too, or the meaningful signs that you can use when you interact with the raspberries, which you will do by accessing and internalizing the aligned information one that's in the berries, which is there because it was created by the genetic life information, the pattern of which we call raspberries. For this sort of semantic information to actually be the information it purports to be, it has to maintain the same sort of alignment that evolution created at that berry interface. And for me to understand it, I need to understand the words and the concepts and the relationships they encode and how to use them to manage the information one that I'll encounter when I get to the raspberries. The concepts, categories, and relationships form their own abstract structure, which intangibly exists inside and amongst groups of people who interact with each other. And since this abstract, intangible structure emerges from the interactions of people being people, it's bound to be filled with all the rich complexity of people, contradictions and overlapping perspectives and layers of ideas and relationships that are concerned with all of the different ways that raspberries have meaning for people. But like there's a stability in the overall pattern of fruits, there's enough stability in this structure that it works. And while every individual will have a slightly different internal version of some portion of this based on their own experiences and abilities, we're pretty good at navigating these differences when we talk to each other. Conversation requires us to manage real-time alignment of the understandings of multiple people, but that's what it's for. Sometimes, though, instead of talking to each other, we make and use interfaces. So instead of an interaction that aligns our understanding with another individual, we're now just interacting with semantic structures that somebody encoded somewhere for us to use to accomplish our goals, like getting some raspberries. This means there needs to be alignment between the structure of the semantic information here and the ontology that I'll have in the moment I'm trying to do something. If we want to make an interface for choosing raspberries, somebody needs to find which parts of all of this raspberry meaning are important for choosing a raspberry. And we need to make sure that at the point of the interface, the goals of the group of people offering the raspberries and what they understand to be relevant aligns with the understanding of the person using the interface to pick good raspberries. If you purchase raspberries on an interface, you don't actually see the actual raspberries. Instead of deciding between actual berries, I'm choosing between concepts that represent different berry offerings that are available to me. The alignment in the raspberries berry interface developed over millions of years and in the context of an ongoing self-reinforcing negotiation. And our ongoing negotiation made this shifting but stable enough intangible network of semantic structures for alignment between individuals, and it did that over hundreds of thousands of years. But to make it into an interface, someone has to make a decision about how to align all of the available semantic meaning with the goals that inspired the making of the interface in a way that means when the particular people who we intend to use it encounter it, they can just use it, like they could just pick a raspberry. And we have to do this in the course of weeks or months, maybe years. Like the raspberry plant uses the structures available in a larger information one context to create its local stability, we have to use the structures available in the larger semantic information context to create some sort of local stability here in our interface so that people can have successful information two style interactions with it. We need to make sure the concepts and categories and their properties and relationships are arranged into appropriate relative positions, not just in some physical diagram of them, but in the abstract conceptual space of shared semantic information that we're actually building with. Local stable structures that reduce uncertainty for people in the moment. If we don't do this, then the information flow breaks and we're not reducing uncertainty. It might seem like this is a new problem, but strictly speaking, it isn't. A recent paper made what I find a very compelling argument that some of these sorts of animals painted in caves across Europe as far back as 37,000 years ago actually encode information about the mating cycles of that type of animal, which means they are interfaces which encode information about semantic concepts, in this case, an auroch and mating, and use a shared ontology for understanding the cycle of seasons and the way to measure time, counting the moon cycles after the spring thaw. These images are found in a wide range of places across Europe and span many generations of time, which means, in my opinion, they're information architecture. But these are still encoding relevant information about the world external to humans. Today, even something like choosing raspberries in person in a store has more to do with all of the human structures around them than it does with any internal reality of the raspberry. Here's 2 packages that I picked up from a store near me, and the berries themselves look the same to me. But here are the differences that are encoded on the packages to help me make my decision. And there's complex networks of structures that give meaning to words like USDA organic or fair trade certified. So instead of just encoding relevant information about the external world, there's often layers and layers of semantic information about things that we might care about and how we might know how something is. And we're not just doing this for things like picking raspberries. We make these sort of semantic interfaces for things with real stakes, like managing our medical care and sharing private photos or managing money. And we often have to stretch available structures, which might have fluid and overlapping meanings in the general network of semantic information. Like, what's the difference between a visitor and a guest? Well, in some interfaces, it has a narrow, specific, rigid meaning, and you need ways to communicate that organizational reality with the people using your interface. So figuring out how to arrange all of these structures is important and difficult, and it's the work of information architecture. Thank you.